Akon, let me turn to you. You're unique for many reasons, but from my point of view, being a native Wolof speaker and being born in St. Louis, and probably there's nobody better on the planet who understands image and perception and reality and how to shape image. So when you look at how Africa is portrayed today, and given your intimate knowledge of the continent, what do you see? And your work with various artists, your own work, what are your thoughts about how we should change Africa's image, or how to go about getting a more balanced perspective? I know you're not a news person, you're a recording artist, but what can we learn from your experience in that respect?
Well, I think ultimately, no matter what you're involved in, the system doesn't change. It's all about marketing. The thing about Africa is that we have a history that's untold, even though it's told, but it's been told in so many ways, and it's been told from the likes of others who've marketed themselves to become leaders in their own universe. So when you look at a place like Africa that has so much history, so much resources, so many, like, just as the culture of it, everything out of Africa has been adapted everywhere else to build there. But we've never utilized what Africa has to build Africa. So it's almost to a point where, because we have, even though I was raised in St. Louis, my mother and my father and all of my family are Senegalese and were born and raised in Senegal.
Right.
We were the only generation that came to the US. You know, my dad made sure that we were all born in the States, so that way we wouldn't have to deal with immigration issues like how he dealt with it trying to get over to the States. So shortly after we were born, he sent us back to Africa. And in Senegal is where I was raised up until later elementary, then moved into junior high, middle school, and then from there I just, stayed in the States, and then, frequently came back and forth. But I noticed that the more I went back, I could never understand that after so many years spent in the US, and then I would go back to visit, that nothing would change. It was kind of mind-boggling for me that I would leave a place for 5 years, come back in the same corner, and that same Coca-Cola bottle is sitting right by my sewer. And it made me think a lot about advancement and what advancement actually means. And one thing I've realized as I was growing forward is that as Africans, we can't allow ourselves to be in a position where we're comfortable. Because what happens is Africa has this aura that's just so loving, and it's one of those environments where you're happy because everything around you just feels good. So it's almost like when I was a child and I was running around, playing soccer barefooted, living in the straw huts, what we call negunya, and I was happy. No electricity, no water. I was completely content and happy with what I was, experiencing until I got on that plane and came to the US and saw that they were better. So it all boiled down to more of the education of what was being installed in the minds of the youth growing forward. Because ultimately what happens is when you have leaders who are used to being in office for like 25, 30 years, you're not going to get a change for the next 25, 30 years. Because there's only one mind and one vision. So I always felt personally that democracy itself is going to be one of the key things that help Africa move forward, because unless you change the line of power every so often, the mindset is going to be in the same as the person that's leading now. Ultimately now, when you're swapping out these leaders, a new person will come with a new vision, new attitude, new environment, and new experience. And through that, new laws will be built out. More than anything, new bills will be written out. But more than anything, especially in Africa, the people have to focus on the youth there. I mean, as I'm moving around, I hear it a lot. Yes, Africa, we have to focus on the youth, we have to focus on the youth, we have to focus on the youth. But anything major that's coming apart that's related to Africa, there's never no programs for the youth. And Africa, 65% of Africa is built and ran by the youth as we speak. The population is more youth-friendly than it is adult-friendly. So, and they're in a position where they see the change. They see what needs to happen. But we're constantly being pounded with the history which keeps holding us down. And it was a funny thing that I was having a conversation with a group of friends, and we was talking about how we teach our children. And a gentleman mentioned how important it was for his children to know their history. And I kind of contradicted to it.
Yeah.
And he couldn't understand why. Well, you're raising your children wrong. They should know what our people went through, this, that, and the other. One thing I realized as I was growing up in the United States in the early 80s, everything was blamed on the white man. If nothing happened for you, or you couldn't get a job, or you couldn't get an opportunity, the white man is holding us down, this, that, and the other. But yet you have a continent that's free and clear, wide open for business, wide open for opportunity, and you can be treated equally without the headache of what you think is holding you down. But yet you don't even take the time to explore what's over there because of the fear that was installed in you, and not even realizing that you can get there with this. It's the same distance from New York to LA. It's the same distance from New York to Senegal, and possibly the same ticket price. And yet you still haven't been there. You don't even know what it's like. You don't even care. Matter of fact, the more, I'll say, negative news that comes from the continent that is exposed, the more it keeps you away. So the media actually plays a bigger role than anyone thinks, because what we put out there is what comes out to the people, and ultimately the people naturally believe what they see and hear on television. So the responsibility of anyone related to the media is so much bigger than they can ever imagine. Ultimately, so when it comes back down to the marketing, it all comes back to what we want people to see. You know, when I came in as an African, no one could believe that an African was a rapper or a singer or an R&B artist that was an A-list artist in the same lines with the Whitney Houstons and the Michael Jacksons and the Lionel Richies and so on and so forth. They were like, impossible, he's not African. And it was a strategy because I had to conceal the fact that I was African up until the point where I got so ahead that they couldn't stop me anyway. But that was the only way that I could actually advance, because when I first came out and put a record out for the first time, I wanted to inherit my African roots. I wanted to let people know that I'm African and this kind of talent actually exists in the continent. But I realized that no radio would play me. BET, which is Black Entertainment Television, told me that I wasn't urban enough. Then MTV said, well, I'm too urban. So where do I fall in the middle? How do I adjust? So I just said, okay, well, I was born in the ghetto, I've been locked up, and I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. And it worked.
Yeah. Akon, let me just pivot to John here. And play off that for a second, because John, you have you spent African culture, and in your work and in the media outlets that you see, do you see an increasingly accurate reflection of African culture? And I'm thinking music and art and fashion and other modes of expression.
With the human eye, I do, clearly, because I'm out there in those grounds and I can clearly see the advantages and the inspiration that inspires the rest of the world. You know, but getting back to the media aspect of it, you really can't blame them. They're just the messengers. They report what they see, and us as humans, we have to evaluate that information and work with it. How does it benefit us? How does it not benefit us? But ultimately, we as a human race will never go forward if we put business and corporate gain before the fact of that you're human first. It's period. Like, people will sell any and everybody out for $1. There's no human value anymore. And that's what it boils down to, because as much money as the corporations and the media for itself, even what they report. I mean, corporations, of course, they do foundations, they try to give back, so on and so forth. But even in that game, it's more funneling funds back on how they can gain more money.
Yeah, but one of the things that we're seeing in Africa when some of our major corporations invest there is that they're creating jobs and they're creating skills.
That's what they say.
Well,
where are the jobs?
There, firm like Procter & Gamble's created like 2,000 jobs there.
There's almost 1 billion people in Africa. 2,000 isn't doing nothing.
Got to start somewhere, right?
But think about it, right? Let's say every year we say we have to start somewhere. Then I go here, when I can literally employ tens of thousands, I employ a couple hundred. Can you imagine? But I don't even blame them, because as Africans, we shouldn't ever have to reach out to build our own country. There's enough money in Africa itself. And let me give you an example. And you can check the statistics. Every week there's a new millionaire coming out of Africa. Every 6 months there's a new billionaire. It's clear there's a lot of money in Africa, liquid cash. If we just bank in Africa, you know what, let's not even help nobody in Africa ever again. All the rich millionaire Africans in Africa, from Africa in Africa, just bank in Africa. That alone will help build our own economy. You follow? But we don't even go that far.
Right.
And that's what hurts me more than anything, because it's like we're so dependent on our neighbors to help us when all we need is just each other.
Do you see that changing at all?
It's going to happen with the youth.
Getting better or getting worse?
I think the youth is the only thing that can do it. I don't think that this generation or generation before us can make that happen. It has to be the generation following. And we have to be able to teach them kids moving forward on how to not allow the history to hold you down and move forward. Because ultimately, if we continue to do what we're doing and follow our leaders in so many words, we're going to be right back here. It's like a 360, never-ending cycle. And someone has to take the stand and just do what's necessary, more for the fact of you being human first. And it goes right back to, let's say, prime example. And this is not quite related to Africa, but the scenarios don't really change. The conflict in Gaza. It's clear that Palestine they can't afford a military to fight back. They don't have the resources that Israel have. So from the human nature, like the human part of it, you can't sit here and literally kill women and children and think it's okay because you think one rocket is going to kill or be sent out. To avoid 2 or 3 people dying, you're killing thousands of people. There's no human rationale to that to me. So as people, we have to think us first. Everything will come naturally if we just do the right thing amongst each other.
Yeah.
You follow what I'm saying?
Fair point. Let me pivot to John. You wanted to get involved in this.
I'm sorry. Is it okay? I think in any situation, there's going to be a good and a bad to the situation. Like, I just left China, and I went into a facility where their bathrooms was hole in the ground. So that's their culture. It wasn't that they did anything disrespectful. That's their culture. Now, the Liberian culture and the Chinese culture are similar when it comes to history and family and stories. They're kind of similar, but the way of how they live, their diet, things of that nature, is kind of different from ours. So I think a lot of times it's always a misunderstanding or miscommunication because we don't communicate enough as a human race. So ultimately, anywhere you go in the world, there's going to be parts of cultures that you may not be, experienced with. Like, in me being in America and learning here, I've realized just how much I need to know, because when I first came to this country, I spoke fluent French, spoke fluent Wolof, and came to the US and learned English. But I was so busy learning English that I lost my French because no one speaks nothing here but English. The only reason why I still speak Wolof is because we spoke Wolof at home. But I don't see how you can be in a position where everything is catered. Like, that's the only thing that I think that US can expand on and I think be better with is educating Americans to the outside world. And I think Africa has always been one of those continents where it's almost like if there was even remotely close conversation about education to Africa, they shut it down. There's a lot more to Africa that needs to be learned, even in the schools, because even when you look at American history, Africa's played a huge role building America. But you would never even know that, you know, so it goes all the way back down. Now, getting back to China itself, the only reason why they feel like China is taking over Africa is because they really are. It's true. And I can say this because I'm a born American, so that makes me an American citizen. As we were traveling all through, with my Akon Lighting Africa project, we have 14 countries that we're locked into contract, you know, supplying smart homes, street lights. But it's ironic that I'm an American citizen and I'm being funded by the Chinese. It's not that US don't have the opportunity, don't have the respect, don't have the manpower, don't have the experience to do it. I just feel personally that there's not enough interest in Africa yet for US to put their hands in there. Because ultimately they have the power to do it, walk in right now and be out of there, and Africa could be amazing with that partnership. Because I think if US and Africa actually really joined forces and created the United States of Africa, this would actually empower and strengthen America a lot more, believe it or not. And you know, I think she might have left, but she's absolutely right. Not investing in Africa at this point will completely disable US in the future, because what Africa has to offer that Chinese now is taking advantage of, and you see how fast China is building. But if they actually have Africa on top of what they're already building, they will become the world's new superpower. So it's a question of, do you get involved now, or do you just wait and be very arrogant and allow that to happen and then come back later and realize, wow, we made a mistake? It goes right back to the music industry, and I like to relate a lot of things with the music industry because it's almost like it reflects reality. The music industry was so powerful at one point. Everyone needed a record deal to be famous. Digital came on board. So it wasn't really a threat yet. Because it's digital, no one really understands it quietly. How does it make money? We quite don't know yet, but just give it a minute. So while that's happening, you have a small company called Apple who's creating what could be the next music industry. They go to someone like a Universal, Sony, Warner Brothers, all these guys, and says, listen, we have a new format that may work for you. What do you think? Oh, well, we don't really understand that. Okay, well, how can we license your music and sell it on our platform? Oh, well, you know what? You can just take it. Whatever helps us sell more records, we're cool. Have it. They give up the whole catalog to Apple. Apple creates iTunes. Now, everything that you buy related to music, entertainment, movies, film, you name it, you have to go to the iTunes to download it and actually own access to content that Universal spends millions and billions of dollars creating so that they can get 30% of what Apple makes, 70% of what they're making. So they literally came and took over the music business because they didn't see tomorrow.
Akon, let me just pivot for a second because we're running out of time. I want to bring it back to Africa. And I want to convey a Twitter question that we've had. And this is to you, Amadou. What is being done to bridge the gap between Africans in the continent and those in the diaspora? And can media play a role in this?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Hey, man.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
No, you're great, man.